Yes. And so I have completed construction of the incrementer-decrementer cell. Look at this. It has 4 pins for standard input and 4 pins for standard output, a carry-out pin, a carry-in pin, and a negator pin. And so to demonstrate, take a look at this. Instant carry. Look at this carry propagation delay. That's almost nothing. That's about as well optimized as you can get in any kind of carry operation. Because technically this is some kind of very specialized decoder, or something very similar to it. Also to demonstrate the negate function for this, and so it's a decrementer now in this position. You can see it overflows negative in this direction. And of course now we can look at the negation carry. Yes, this is going to be very useful for optimizing. I can already tell. Yeah, in fact, I'm going to save this entire thing as a module, just so I can use it later in probably the ALU as well as probably the program counter. Since the program counter likely doesn't require a full adder or subtractor. There, that's a very descriptive name that only I will understand because it's in a standard that only I understand. So I can put this near the relevant cell here, the adder subtractor. Clock probably doesn't belong with the memory, although I don't think we have any other. Oh yeah, the decoders. That's a control system module. This memory belongs with this other memory, just to get things organized. There. And now everything is where it belongs in its correct categories, except for this. There. We have the interface segment, we have the control segment, the memory segment, and the process segment for processing the data. However that would be pronounced. So all of the core concepts, we have input output, the sort of what would that be? Just the basic infrastructure, I think. We have the information itself and a way of manipulating the information. Oh yeah, this is inhaled water droplets. Never mind that though. I just thought of what this could perfectly be described as. The conditions by which the information is transformed by the processing equipment. Yeah, that makes a lot more sense. And so we have all of the core fundamental components of all three of these pieces. We just need to put them together somehow. And that, of course, is the hard part, because whether or not you make a well thought out optimized design makes the difference between an impractical machine and an invaluable machine. For this, I think we're going to actually want to have a 2-bit to 4 unary decoder in the back for taking in the 2 bits and then outputting the quaternary digit. I haven't settled on any one symbol type for quaternary. I'm trying to think of what would be the most intuitive, especially for a non-computer user. And so the decoder would likely look something like this. And yes, all of these nor, all of these and these two should be or. These are all correct. And so now, for the first one, we want all of them off. For the second one, we want... hold on a second. I need to specify which one is significant. Because if you don't, that's a problem. A huge problem. There. Now everything is specified. Yeah, that way we can be sure. The next one needs to be on for this, off for this, and on for this, in that pattern. The next one of these needs to be off, and the next two needs to be on. And to truth table test it, full factorial analysis. This is not correct, because I didn't wire these two. Now it is all correct. Exactly as it should be. Perfect. And then I can finalize this by removing those from the abstraction layer. Getting rid of this useless garbage board that I use as some kind of build plate. And then saving this so that I don't need to rebuild it every time. Going to save this one as... There. Is that... There. That's better. Now, I can affix this to the display grid matrix. But before I do that, I would like to make this look better. Because believe it or not, looks matter a lot more than one may think. No user wants to use a machine that looks awful. And for this particular circumstance, how exactly would I want to do this? In this case, I have an idea. Put this like this. That looks correct. And then for each one of these pins, I map a symbol as a digit. The system should be very simple and basic. Although I just remembered another thing. We need an activate pin so that we don't always see something there. This will technically be a fifth symbol, which will be space. Actually, would space be a good official symbol? Potentially. Or... yes. This way, in order for anything to be displayed on this pin, the activator pin needs to be active. Which we can actually do manually right now. And then we can add 2 debug switches here for doing our debug work. Next symbol, 1. Which is this one here. That looks appropriate. And after that one, symbol 2. I'm just doing this arbitrarily. Actually, what would be a good symbol for 2? Hmm. You see, this is the difficulty. Thinking of a good standard, and then once the standard is solidified in stone, you regret making the standard because you have found all of the problems with it that you never imagined before. All too relatable. Yeah. Hmm. I have an idea. Why not just basic shapes like square and circle? That's relatable to even ones of simple mind, which not necessarily a bad thing. Hmm. Hmm. Although that might also pose problems. I might as well just do something that works, that I know works, like uh, perhaps this, and then hmm, or this is the hardest part. I'll think about that while I work on something else instead. Should probably color this to make it better for user interface, because as it is right now, it's not great. Hmm. It should be a muted color. That looks pretty good. That's prepared for use later. Now, what else is there to think about? We have the ALU memory and control unit. The memory, I think, would be the simplest one right now. So for this, we can extend the stack to make it 8 units deep, and then extend it horizontally to make it a 4-bit stack instead of a 1-bit stack as it is right now. But that's actually not what we want. Hold on a second. A minor complication. There. Making sure that doesn't happen again. Like that. And which way does this go again? Yes, I see now. Guess what? It's going to be fun to wire in all of these forward and backward pins. And actually, I think... I'm not sure which side is the best for input and output. Ideally, there would be a way of detecting a stack overflow so that you don't just lose information out of nowhere. Wait, what was the other one called? This one basically replaces this one, so we can get rid of it. Completely useless now. We can just cut that component out of this component, and it would be the same thing. And also mind that this is using the triple stacked XOR gates instead of the theoretical self-wired XOR gates that would be much more ideal. But of course, doing the best that we can with what we have, seeing as this is doing things unmodified currently. This is 4 wide 8 deep. And that's now our biggest part by a lot. And I'm not sure if we should get rid of this now. It feels like a much easier thing to do to just copy this than to cut one out of this, because now there's a whole row that you need to disintegrate in order to get it out. Putting this back where it belongs, next to the register. And about the register, going to need one register for the accumulator in the ALU. Going to need at least a few registers for the control unit for keeping memory of things like opcodes and addresses. And what else? I'm going to need a bank of registers, I'm remembering, for the memory cache, or the RAM as it is also sometimes called, or also just the registers, which kind of a deceptive name, I think. And of course, in order to make a good addressable bank of registers, you're going to need the registers themselves, but not only that, you're going to need a router. Routers you can make using decoders, but you're also going to want to have another input back here for the actual information to be routed. And there's also the inverse form, which routes information in the opposite direction, which actually isn't difficult to do. You just need to wire this backwards in reverse. So actually I'm going to instantiate two more of these. One of them is going to be the splitting router, and the other one is going to be the joining router. This is going to be the splitting router. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's halfway. 9, 10. That's this one. 11. Having fun yet? 12. 13. Making sure nothing is miswired. Yes. 14. Only 2 more after this one. 15. And finally 16. And then this becomes the information input, the data input, and these become the control input. So I recolor those to match their purpose. I prefer to have control inputs be this teal color and data in and out be blue and yellow. And now, to demonstrate, data being piped to any one of the locations selected merely by using a decoder to select something, and then just a very small amount of additional logic to send that thing. And this can be saved as easy to remember now. And then the other one, which is this one I think I selected. I like to space everything correctly. It has the same gate here, same location, but its purpose is inverted. Instead of sending, it will be receiving. So I'm going to wire every one of these back to it. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 1000. And then, of course, to match their purpose, I'm going to recolor them as well. Wait a second, I just did something wrong. Guess what? These are in the incorrect orientation. I forgot which way they were supposed to be. And now I can resave this as what it's supposed to be. I'm glad that I found that out early instead of later on like last time that happened. Yes, there was a last time, and it was a debug nightmare. I never want to do that ever again. And finally, this is everything. And so now, wait, there, because I remembered it's taking so many inputs. Actually, I think there's an unfortunate side effect with this. It's going to need the control for it to be, or wait, no, actually, wait, now I need to remember exactly what I was thinking about. I'm remembering that, oh yes, lost in the passageways of thought. So the problem here is this is not receiving a signal, but it says that it is because the second input of the AND gate is not connected to anything. And so it's, instead of being an AND gate, it's a wire, which is a problem, of course. How do you detect whether or not an input is wired in? Well, the only answer I can think of is if I affix another gate here and then pipe that there, and that fixes the problem. Unfortunately, however, that also induces latency, which, as I'm sure you're aware, is one of the things I hate the most, to say the least. I'm trying to actually think of a better way to do this, because having splitters and joiners separately, I don't feel like is the final solution. Ideally, you would have something more like an actual router that's capable of taking data from any one port and porting it to any other port. That way, it can be a much smarter machine. I'll figure this out later because this is a logical nightmare. I don't like how close to the memory this control logic is getting. Yeah, they all need to stay in their correct configuration. Actually, this is technically arithmetic, so I'll put it in the back corner where we can forget about it. The sequencer I was mentioning earlier we can make with a simple stack memory cell, or stack of stack memory cells affixed to each other in any length we want, the sequence to be, with an initializing bit that only triggers on instantiation or on start, or when none of the bits are active, sensed. That would be a self-regulating system. It detects if it has a fail state and corrects itself. But the point is, you can feed this clock signal into that sequencer and have it switch through all of the possible states that it can be in in Unary instead of binary. Unary is easier to deal with. Binary is more space efficient. Just look at the difference between a binary numeral system and tally marks. You can have an entire wall filled with tally marks that represents the number 10,000, or you can have a single string of binary digits. And last time I checked, 10,000. What's actually the power of 2 that is closest to 10,000 above it? There's 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512. That's the 10th power. So it's the 11th power that can store the value 1000. So that's one binary number with 11 digits. I can store the value 10,000. No, 1,000 actually. Uh, now I look like an idiot. No, for 10,000 that would be. Hold on, let me think. Doubling 1,000 would be 2,000, and then 4,000, and then 8,000, and then one more than that would be 16,000, which can store 10,000, which, for my calculations, that's 4 more powers forward, so that's 15 digits in binary can store 10,000. That's a lot of math to do all at once that quickly. This symbol is unsatisfying, and also just generally not great. What about... Yes, this... I can tell this is going to be the funnest part of all. What kind of good symbol can you make with only 15 pixels? 3 by 5. That is a question that not many people can answer. Or at least not very well. Or at least I can't. These two symbols actually look very similar, which is bad. We don't want that. But we also want to be able to tell symbols apart so that there's space between them, which is also difficult in this format. So for the next one along, I think I have an idea for something that tiles well. Added bonus, it also looks somewhat like the number 2, which is an unintended effect, actually. And then the third one needs to be distinct from this one, which is going to be even more difficult, because as I'm sure you're aware, you can only make so many distinct symbols with so many pixels. In this case, 2 to the power of 15, which we just talked about being around 16,000 possible symbols, which not all of them are useful for anything. In fact, most of them are completely useless. So, thinking about this more critically, I really like the idea, though, of a hybrid of unary and quaternary, where each digit of quaternary looks like unary and so is simple to mentalize. For instance, the digit 2 being 2 lines and the digit 3 being 3 lines. It's intuitive. That's why tally marks are so common, is because they're intuitive. They're just very inefficient, and that's why they don't get used for anything practical. And now the 4th digit, which is the value 3. I think for right now, we might as well just settle on something. So, something that looks somewhat like 3 would be that. Yeah, although I don't really like that. Mm. This is... I think I might actually need to figure out a different method for doing this because this looks horrible. I... I'm speechless. The interface, I feel, is going to be harder than I first expected now. In fact, we might even need a GPU at some point. That's going to be fun to figure out. Memory should be one of the easiest. We just need to get the splitter and joiner working, attach them to a bank of these registers, and then from that point it's simple. The stack is even simpler because look, it's already prefabricated. You just need to slot it directly into wherever it needs to go, and then you can address it. The ALU looks to be more simple now than it's ever been before, strangely. The one thing I was talking about before here, the stack being useful for a shift register, for shifting. I think this might actually be perfect for an accumulator, now that I think about it. So, take a look. You can insert values horizontally, and then you can export them horizontally, but you can also shift them up or down vertically using these 2 pins. And so, if I make a mechanism for erasing the value in this, which would only take 4 shifts in either direction, and then immediately injecting a new value, which you can just do by activating these pins using something similar to a transistor on this side or that side. You could easily make this into the accumulator slash bit shifter, and so you can combine the 2 functions to form an even better component. And then at that point, all of this is all you need for your ALU. We have 4 functions here, 2 functions here, that's 6. 2 more here, that's 8. 2 more here, that's 10. Although, if you include barrel shifting and logical shifting as separate things, that's 12 instructions, 12 unique instructions right here, which can fit within the length of 4 bits, which means we only need 4-bit instructions. Addressing, I have a great idea for. Instead of the typical method that I thought of earlier, what about serial addressing? And so you can enter an arbitrary number of 4-bit half bytes as a long serial address, and then that will address to that particular point in memory. The only problem is you would need a delimiter for telling what the end of the sequence is. And of course, one way to do that is to have 0 be the delimiter. Although, if 0 is the delimiter, then that complicates things quite significantly, actually. That's one of the possible states that is now consumed by a special control code. And so now, instead of having 16 working bits, working combinations, you have 15 working combinations, which is difficult to explain, but easy to demonstrate. Now what? This disaster. I have a thought, what if... I had an idea earlier. Yes. We could use solely alphanumeric characters, which would allow us to not rely on making new characters out of nothing. So we can have this be the period, which would need to go lower at about here. And then additionally, for this, the 1, we're going to want to have that extend further down. That's correct stacking. Stacks vertically with a gap of 1 instead of 2 like before. I prefer that. And so that makes sense. And then the next character should be an evolution of that character. So perhaps could be something like T or Y. We had Y before, didn't we? That wasn't satisfying. And this is not distinct enough to be separate from 1. That's not a good character for 2. And because of that, we're going to need to make even more alterations. Which I actually have an idea for. What if we do something like this? This is a disaster. I think the biggest problem is that we're not giving ourselves enough space. Yeah, we may need 5 more digits, pixels on this side. There, that's going to take up more space, but look better. Which in this case I feel might be a worthy trade. And so with this, we should be able to now finally do what we originally wanted. Or what I originally wanted, that is, what I intended. And so now we have 2 lines that connect at a point here. And before that we have 1 line here. And before that we have a single point. And now for the the 4th symbol, which carries the value 3 on its own. I would prefer to have 3 lines that connect at 2 points collectively. Which should be something like this. There. It looks like an M or an N. I would prefer it to look like an N, but that's difficult with so few pixels. However, this may be satisfactory. It looks distinct enough to me. And making them look distinct is a large part of everything. So now we have this gap here, this margin for tiling. That's definitely going to be needed. And so this should be a finished design. We can now just save this as our Unary quaternary display. Unary coded quaternary. I'll just leave it like that. That's ready for use now. We can connect this to screen space memory, which can then hold characters. And that could actually be addressable registers that hold the screen space memory. And every 2 of these bits is one symbol. And so that's very compact for memory, that is. You can see a lot more that way. What else? For this, we're going to need some kind of I/O standard. How are we going to read input? Writing output is simple. You can just address the screen space memory as if it were just normal memory. That's one solution. Or you can have a special function for it that has its own instruction. But taking input, I suppose one way to do that would be to have a register store the most recent input, because we don't want to miss an input because the clock rate of the computer is going to be so slow. You could easily miss any kind of input. And so you need some kind of special buffer for handling input, just like in normal computers. And so that way we can take input when we can, or we can take the machine can take input when it's ready for it. Of course, the problem becomes buffer overflow, which is scary. And of course, these are going to need their own handling system. Or perhaps we can just eliminate both of these and have it be just these. We don't really need this. There. The machine only really... In fact, the machine only needs one input, one button, and that's enough for serial input. But it's also so impractical, it's like the tally system. It's actually a perfect parallel. You need at least 2 buttons to make anything useful, or anything practical, I should say. This is up to 8 buttons, which is more than enough for most things, even though it may not seem like it. There are some cases in which it's a lot better to have a much bigger keyboard with a lot more functionality, but that's a problem for a later date. This is not the time to be worrying about such a thing. And so this is our input-output system that's been abbreviated from last time and also optimized. Actually, hold on. I realized something. This shouldn't be like this. There. I should probably save this again now. There, and we don't need to save this because it's so simple I can replicate it in seconds. Now we might want to start thinking about gluing these components together to make something more complicated. So for instance, we could form this stack memory into a full accumulator barrel shifter hybrid, or just shifter, shift register, shift accumulator. Yes, I'm going to call this the shift accumulator. What else? I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anything because that happens a lot. Oh yes, forming this into a bank of addressable memory is going to be a thing later on as well. What else? I'm going to need to figure out the serial addressing system because that's going to make this so incredibly extensible that it's not even going to be funny. Or maybe it will be. That's not something we can know until the time comes. I think that's enough for today. I'm beginning to slow down because I got so much done already. This should be enough. Actually, might be able to draw more diagrams. No, I'll save that for later as well. This is already enough.